But first, tonight's op-ed. Well, this PR tour is on a roll, isn't it? Now the whole family's in on the act. If it's, it's the Cheneys, they're on a roll. If it's not Dick, it's Liz, the daughter. Now, it just seems to me that both seem to be on a mission to distort the facts and gin up fear in the hearts and minds of the American people. And I will tell you straight up, folks, this is, in my opinion, below the belt. The Cheney cult is now what I call them. They're now acting like defendants in a trial trying to spoil the jury pool. In this case, it's the case of the American people. Now, if the Cheneys and if Dick Cheney is not judgmental enough for you on the Obama administration, just listen to his daughter.
Clearly, what they're doing is releasing images that show American military men and women in a very negative light. And I have heard from families of service members, from families of 9/11 victims, this question about, when did it become so fashionable for us to side really with the terrorists?
Side with the terrorists. Now, that's interesting. The conservatives used to consider that treason, sedition, simply anti-American, certainly unpatriotic. Here's the bottom line. The American people want the truth, and the American people chose a new direction last November. Full disclosure. And that's really what the Cheneys, the whole family, that's what they're worried about. To suggest that the president is siding with the terrorists is simply undermining the efforts of a lot of brave Americans protecting this country. Circumventing the truth with reckless accusations just illustrates how far this Klan will go. They are not American, in my opinion. They don't love the country. They just love it when it's right for them, and they love themselves. And you know what, folks, we need to remember? There is a standard of behavior here, because back in 1993, the Clinton administration was just 37 days old. The World Trade Center got hit. Those killers were brought to justice. And in the aftermath, you didn't see Bill Clinton and Al Gore working the media circuit, second-guessing the Bush administration about keeping the country safe when we got hit on the Bush-Cheney watch. So let's just be up front. Mr. Cheney, Clinton and Gore kept the country safe for 7.5 years after that terrorist attack. And I believe that's what you told Fox yesterday, as if you really deserve a special medal there. So while Dick Cheney continues to Monday morning quarterback for the sake of basically saving his ass and his legacy, let the hearings begin. And they did today.
Nothing I have seen, including the 2 documents to which former Vice President Cheney has repeatedly referred, indicates that the torture techniques authorized by the last administration were necessary, or that they were the best way to get information out of detainees. So clearly, the former vice president is misleading the American people when he says otherwise.
There was strong testimony today, and we'll have that in just a moment. But first, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland was at today's hearing. Senator, great to have you with us tonight here on the Ed Show.
Ed, it's good to be with you.
I got to ask you, Lindsey Graham said in his opening remarks that this was, political grandstanding, a political witch hunt. Do you agree with that?
No, not at all. I think it's important that the record be clear. And I think today's hearing was very constructive. We had a former FBI agent who testified very clearly that using these enhanced methods, that is torture, would not get reliable information, that the FBI understood that. The best way to get information is to develop rapport with the detainees. That's how you get their confidence and get information. And if you use torture, you're going to get unreliable information. And by the way, we also had testimony today that there was clear information made available that this was not legal, and the Bush administration chose to ignore it.
Okay, we're going to get to that in just a moment, but here is testimony that I think caught the attention of a lot of Americans here from an FBI interrogator.
The contractors had to keep requesting authorization to use harsher and harsher methods. In the case of Abu Zubaydah, that continued for several months, right till waterboarding was introduced. And waterboarding itself had to be used 83 times, an indication that Abu Zubaydah had already called his interrogators bluff.
Senator, based on that soundbite alone, it seems that there was quite a bit accomplished today in the first day of this hearing.
Oh, absolutely. That's the responsibility of Congress, is to oversight, to see what happened. And I think the record is going to be very clear. Despite what the former vice president has said, the record is clear that this was not the best way to get reliable information, and it was clearly illegal.
Now, what was the most startling information that struck you today that you think could make a real difference here?
I think it was that testimony you just heard, but he went on to say, look, we were experienced in interrogations. We walked away from this because we knew it wouldn't get the right information and it was wrong. It was only the contract people working for the CIA that decided to use these enhanced methods.
We just keep talking about it every single day. Civil libertarians may have to thank Dick Cheney and his compulsion to keep defending himself in public. Joining us now is retired Army Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He worked in the Bush White House as former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. Colonel Wilkerson, it is great to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
The last time you were on the show, you said you were not sure if there was enough political will in Washington to pursue accountability on the issue of torture. By speaking out so forcefully and repeatedly on the issue, is Dick Cheney potentially helping to create that political will?
I think he may be, which is, of course, I think counter to his purpose. I was listening to your lead-in. Let me just say two things right off the bat. First, you notice that Dick Cheney always says 7.5 years or almost 8 years, no terrorist attack and so forth. That's because he has the honor of being, or the dishonor of being, the man on whose watch 3,000 Americans died. More Americans died from a terrorist attack under Dick Cheney's leadership, if you will, than any other president in our history. The second thing that I want to say is that the reason we have not had another attack in this country more than any other thing is over 200,000 Americans who have been fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq against al-Qaeda and other associated enemies. And they present not only this skill and talent at doing what they need to do, they also present a target-rich environment for al-Qaeda. So we have had 200,000 Americans overseas presenting al-Qaeda with very, very lucrative targets, and therefore, why would they want to come here? This is idiocy of the first order that Dick Cheney is putting out.
Given that he was so reluctant to talk to the press while he was vice president, and he was sort of proudly disdainful of public opinion, which I always thought was sort of one of the more interesting things about him, whether or not you think it's admirable. What do you make of his decision just to be talking so much right now? Is this an attempt to mount a public defense? Is this about the fear of being prosecuted?
He's a fearful man, as I've said before, and that very well could be the case. He looks like Batman without Bruce Wayne's principles, or maybe more accurately, the Joker with a straight face. I don't know why, though, people give him so much airtime. This is the man who, after all, said we know with absolute certainty Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. We know he has an active nuclear program. We know he has contacts with al-Qaeda. This is a man who has told more lies from a public pulpit than almost anyone else I know. Why does the media give him so much airtime?
I would like to have him on this show because I would like to ask him the questions that I think a prosecutor should ask him personally. So if I could give him airtime, I have to tell you, I would, but he won't say yes to our interview requests yet.
Well, I'd love to watch that show.
So would I. Maybe you could come here and help me out if it was going to happen. Do you know anything about, I guess the next thing that we're due to hear is the CIA Inspector General's report on the destruction of those interrogation videotapes. Given that that's the next shoe we expect to drop, is there any reason to believe that Dick Cheney might be particularly worried about that next round of discussion, accusation, potential calls for accountability on torture?
I think absolutely so, because Dick Cheney was around Richard Nixon when Richard Nixon made the mistake of keeping his tapes and not destroying them. And I have no problem whatsoever understanding and knowing in my own mind that those tapes were destroyed either with the permission, tacit or otherwise, of the Vice President's office or by the direct order of the Vice President's office, because those tapes would have been damning.
Colonel Wilkerson, you're a Republican, and I think that and you're not a politician, but I think the political implications of Cheney being out there so publicly on this issue are pretty obvious. Is there anybody in the Republican Party who might tell him to keep quiet or leave the stage or stop advancing this own agenda that he seems to be pursuing at the expense of the party? Is there anybody who could tell him to keep quiet, who he might listen to?
I would have expected that George H.W. Bush would have said something in private, certainly. I don't know that former Vice President Cheney would listen at this point, though. His attack on Colin Powell was something that stunned me. I didn't think that he would go that far. He's destroying what's left of the Republican Party. I think the latest polls show we're down to 21% of Americans identifying as Republicans.
I suspect that if Cheney continues, it'd be down in the low teens. He's destroying the party. There needs to be someone with some, as we say in the Army, some intestinal fortitude, some guts, who steps forward and tells this man to go home and shut up.
On that point of his recent comments attacking Colin Powell, he said on CBS on Sunday he would rather have Rush Limbaugh in the Republican Party than Colin Powell. I know you don't still work with General Powell, but beyond being shocked, do you think that there's any appropriate response? Do you think he should be asked for an apology?
2 tours in Vietnam, 35-plus years service to his country, 5 deferments for Dick Cheney, never served a day in the military, said he had other priorities. I don't even think there's a comparison.
Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir.